Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. So today, we're going to get into a really fascinating topic, and I know a lot of you have requested this one. A lot of you seem to be really interested in this sort of thing. So it's the ethics of intervening in nature, specifically when it comes to predation. You guys sent over some really interesting material that proposes some radical solutions to the problem of suffering in the wild. And the two solutions are PKP, painlessly killing predators, and HP, herbivorizing predators. So I don't know about you, but when I first read this, I thought, okay,
it's pretty wild.
This is going to be a wild one.
Yeah, it certainly pushes the boundaries of how we typically think about things. And then, when you start to unpack all the ethical and practical considerations, it gets really, really complex.
Well, and right off the bat, one of the sources makes this claim that PKP might actually be preferable to HP. And I got to say that my initial reaction was, well, how can ending a predator's life be better than just
changing their diet?
Changing your diet. Yeah, it just seems so counterintuitive.
It does seem that way at first, and I think that's where this thing called the non-identity problem becomes really important. The listeners are probably at least somewhat familiar with the idea. The basic idea is that when you're altering who comes into existence, it makes it kind of tricky to assess whether those individuals were actually helped by whatever action brought them about or harmed by the action that brought them about. But this source takes that idea and really applies it to predation in some interesting ways.
Yeah. For example, they argue that while modifying predators, to make them herbivores, might seem like you're doing future generations of prey animals a huge favor. But then you get into that those animals wouldn't even exist if we hadn't intervened.
Exactly.
So are we really doing them a favor?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, what does it even mean to benefit someone who literally wouldn't exist without the action that you're talking about? Are they better off or are they just different?
And the source doesn't shy away from tackling the sort of flip side of that, which is the potential harm to the predators themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
And I got to say, when you start thinking about a wolf that can no longer hunt, that can't teach its cubs these skills that have been so central to its species for centuries, you can't help but feel
sad.
A sense of sadness. Yeah. Like you're taking away something essential.
The source really highlights the potential psychological impact of HAP on existing predators. And you've got these creatures whose entire being, their biology, their social structures, it's all built around hunting, imagine, A lioness that's unable to experience the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of a kill, the bonding that comes from sharing a meal with her pride. I mean...
Yeah, it's not just taking away their food source. It's their whole way of life.
Exactly.
Their social interactions, their, identity as a predator.
Yeah, and the source really digs into how that could lead to, confusion, frustration. Even some kind of existential angst.
So you've got this potential harm to existing predators, and then this whole complex non-identity problem for future generations of prey animals. And all this is before we even get into the practical challenges of actually doing either of these things on a large scale.
Right, and that's a whole other layer, right? Because we're talking about global ecosystems. We're talking about these delicate balances that have evolved over millennia. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think about how we would even begin to implement something like this.
Okay, so let's say, just for the sake of argument, we decide to go with PKP. Wouldn't a world without lions, tigers, bears be kind of boring?
Right.
I mean, there's these majestic creatures, such a vital part of our, imagination. What would we lose, not just ecologically, but culturally, aesthetically?
That's such an interesting point. And I think the source does acknowledge that there's potential for, a sense of loss there, especially for you and I, who, have grown up with these animals as symbols of power and beauty and wildness. But they also challenge us to think about whether that loss might be less profound than we imagine.
Okay, I'm listening.
How so?
Well, I mean, think about it this way. Future generations, the ones who would grow up in a world without predators, they wouldn't have that same sense of loss because they wouldn't have the same frame of reference. Their understanding of nature, of what's normal and what's missing, would be shaped by the world that they inhabit.
Okay.
If you'd never tasted chocolate, you wouldn't miss it. Right?
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's they wouldn't know what they're missing. And then for you and me...
The source suggests that maybe we would find new ways to appreciate nature. new sources of awe and wonder once we shift our focus away from this predator-prey dynamic. Maybe we start to see the intricate beauty of plant life in a new light, or develop a deeper appreciation for all the herbivores that could flourish in a predator-free world.
It's kind of like how we can still marvel at the dinosaurs, even though they've been extinct for millions of years.
Right.
We have the fossils, we have museums, we have movies. Like, we can still experience their majesty in other ways.
Yeah, and who knows what technological advancements might allow us to experience these animals in the future. I mean, imagine, virtual reality simulations so realistic that you could practically feel the breath of a lion on your neck, all without, any animals actually being harmed.
Okay, I'll admit that's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the ethics of PKP.
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to hear painlessly killing predators.
Right.
And think that it's just wrong no matter how you spin it, taking a life. Even if it's quick and painless.
Yeah.
Feels like a huge moral leap.
It is a difficult concept to grapple with, for sure, and the source doesn't shy away from that at all. And they actually present this thought experiment that I found really challenging, which is, imagine a situation where a human being, through no fault of their own, is programmed to kill.
Okay.
Maybe it's some, brainwashing situation or a neurological disorder or some kind of crazy technological manipulation.
Right.
But let's say this person poses a genuine and imminent threat to others.
Okay.
And there is no way to stop them except by using lethal force.
Okay.
In that scenario, would taking their life, even though it's a tragedy, be considered justifiable?
That's a tough one.
Right.
On the one hand, it feels wrong to end a life, especially when that person isn't acting out of malice, free will.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if it's the only way to prevent harm to innocent people, I mean, I can see the argument.
And that's exactly the point that the source is trying to make with this thought experiment. They're highlighting the complexity of our moral intuitions around killing.
Right.
They're not saying it's a perfect analogy to PKP, but it forces us to kind of confront this question of whether our aversion to killing is always, in every circumstance, the most ethical stance.
Right.
What if, in some cases, allowing harm to continue is actually the less compassionate choice?
That's a really thought-provoking point.
Right.
It makes you question whether our emotional response to killing is always the best guide.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with situations that are so far outside our normal experience.
Exactly. And when we're talking about PKP, we're not just talking about a single act of killing. We're talking about a policy, like a deliberate intervention on a global scale. Right.
The stakes are incredibly high, and the potential consequences are profound and difficult to predict. I mean,
which is why I guess we need to carefully consider all the potential downsides of PKP.
Oh, absolutely.
As well. It can't just be about the philosophical arguments in favor of it. We have to think about
the practical implications.
The unintended consequences.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And the source actually dedicates, a significant portion to exploring those potential harms.
Like, what are some of the biggest concerns that they raise?
Well, the most obvious one is ecological disruption.
Okay.
Removing apex predators from ecosystems could have these cascading effects that we can't even fully anticipate.
Yeah.
You could see, overpopulation of prey animals, which could lead to overgrazing, habitat destruction, and ultimately harm to other species.
Right. It's like pulling a thread out of a tapestry and watching the whole thing unravel.
Exactly. And even if we could somehow predict and manage those ecological effects, there's the question of what PKP would do to us, to humanity. I mean,
to humanity.
Would we become desensitized to death? Would it change our relationship with nature in a really fundamental way?
The source raises those very questions.
Okay.
They talk about, the potential for desensitization, the psychological toll that carrying out PKP might take on the people involved.
Right.
The risk of fostering a more utilitarian view of life where certain creatures are just deemed expendable.
And then there's that slippery slope argument that always comes up in these discussions.
Right.
If we start justifying killing on this scale, even for seemingly noble reasons, where does it end? Does it make it easier to justify other forms of killing in the future?
Right. It's a chilling thought.
It is a chilling thought.
And it's something we can't afford to ignore. The source is very clear that PKP is not a simple solution. And it shouldn't be undertaken lightly. It's a concept that demands careful consideration, rigorous analysis, and a willingness to confront the ethical and practical challenges.
So it sounds like even the proponents of PKP recognize that it's not a clear-cut case, that there are serious downsides that need to be weighed against the potential benefits.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole, depth dive so compelling and challenging. It's not about finding easy answers.
Right.
It's about wrestling with these complex questions that force us to re-examine our assumptions about, our place in the world and our responsibilities.
Okay, so we've talked about the non-identity problem.
Yeah.
The potential harms of HP, the potential loss, and also the possible benefits of a predator-free world.
Right.
The ethical parallels to justified killing in humans.
Yeah.
And the ecological and psychological risks of PKP. My brain is doing backflips trying to keep up with all this.
It's a lot to process, for sure. But even with all of that on the table,
the source ends with this one final thought experiment
that
I think adds yet another layer of complexity to this whole debate.
Right.
And they ask us to imagine just for a moment that predators themselves could understand the suffering they cause. That they could grasp the pain, the fear, the sheer terror experienced by their prey.
Okay, I'm picturing this. Go on.
Okay, and then imagine further that they could understand our proposal. To end that cycle of suffering through, a swift and merciful end to their own lives. What if, instead of seeing us as murderers, they saw us as liberators, as agents of compassion?
Wow, that's
right.
That's heavy.
It really reframes.
It completely reframes it. Yeah. I mean, are we being cruel by killing them, or are we actually granting them some kind of mercy that they themselves might choose if they had the capacity to understand?
It's a haunting question.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's an easy answer.
But it does force us to consider the possibility that, our very human-centric perspective might be blinding us to other ways of understanding this issue, other moral frameworks that might challenge our assumptions about what's right and wrong.
It makes you wonder, what if the predators themselves had a voice in this debate? What would they say?
It's a question we all need to sit with.
Yeah.
For a while, it might not change our minds, but it certainly adds a new dimension to the conversation.
So after this deep dive, I don't know that I have any firm answers. But I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on this whole issue of human intervention in nature.
Right.
It's clearly not a simple issue.
No.
And there are no easy solutions.
You've hit the nail on the head. This is a topic that really demands, ongoing reflection, open-mindedness, a willingness to consider multiple perspectives, even those that might initially make us uncomfortable.
Man, I feel like we've really gone deep on this one.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
Yeah. But, I think that's what's so great about these deep dives. We get to really, dig into these really thorny questions.
Yeah, it pushes us to think beyond those, knee-jerk reactions and really grapple with the nuances of these ethical dilemmas.
Absolutely. So let's maybe try to bring this all together.
Okay.
We started with this seemingly crazy idea.
Right.
Painlessly killing predators, PKP, as a solution to the problem of suffering in nature. And I think we quickly realized that it's not as simple
not at all
as it sounds.
Not even close.
We've got the non-identity problem, which makes it really hard to say whether future generations of prey animals would actually benefit from us intervening.
Right, and then there's the harm to the existing predators.
Right.
I mean, it's not just the act of ending their lives.
Right.
It's the potential psychological disruption of taking away something that's so
central to who they are.
Fundamental to their nature,
And then on top of that, you've got the potential impact on us.
So absolutely.
On humanity.
Right, on humans.
Ecological disruptions.
Yeah.
The psychological toll of actually
carrying it out.
The risk of desensitization, and then that slippery slope argument.
The slippery slope. Yeah.
Always seems to pop up.
Always comes up.
In these conversations.
You can't avoid it, right?
Right. And then beyond all of that, it's is it even possible to do this on a global scale?
Yeah, we're talking about a massive...
I mean, we can't just snap our fingers and poof, all the predators are gone.
No, and even if we could, is that the world we want to live in?
Right.
A world without, the thrill of seeing a hawk circling overhead or the awe-inspiring power of a lioness on the hunt. I mean,
it's a trade-off.
It is a trade-off.
And I think that's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Weighing the potential benefits against the very real costs.
To the animals and to ourselves.
And there's no easy answer. There's no formula that tells us what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway here, is approaching these ethical dilemmas with humility, recognizing that our own perspectives are limited, and just being willing to engage in open and honest dialogue.
With people who might see things totally differently.
Exactly, even when it's uncomfortable.
Well, I know I've done some serious brain stretching today, and hopefully you have too out there listening.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the ethics of intervening in nature. We'll see you next time.